The senator's car was already running. It was one of those cold Toronto mornings where the air bites through your coat before you've even left the lobby. And Senator Douglas Whitmore was standing beside his black Cadillac Escalade outside the Fairmont Royal York, checking his phone, already late for a breakfast meeting at the Harbor Club. His driver, a quiet man named Wallace, was holding the rear door open, waiting. That's when the girl stepped forward. She was maybe 11 years old. Dark brown skin, natural hair pulled back under a toque that was slightly too big for her head. She had a backpack on both shoulders and a look on her face that was too steady for a child her age. She walked right up to the senator's car, not running, not shy, and she said one word, "Please." Wallace moved to intercept her. But Senator Whitmore held up his hand. Something about the way she said it stopped him. She wasn't begging. She wasn't performing. She said it the way you say a word when it's the only word you have left, and you've been saving it carefully, the way you save your last dollar. The senator crouched down on the wet sidewalk in his $600 coat right there in front of the hotel and asked her what was wrong. What she told him next changed everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand what that girl said, you have to understand who she was. And to understand who she was, you have to go back to the beginning, back to a basement apartment on Markham Street, back to a woman named Ama Mensah-Forson, and everything she had already survived before any of this started. Ama Mensah-Forson came to Toronto from Accra when she was 9 years old. She came with her mother and a single hard-sided suitcase, and the name of a church in Scarborough that her mother's cousin had written on a piece of paper. They stayed in that cousin's apartment for 6 months, all 3 of them in one room, until her mother saved enough to rent their own place. Her mother cleaned offices at night and sewed alterations during the day. Nadia did her homework on the kitchen table and helped fold laundry and never, not once, complained. That was a rule in their house. Not a spoken rule, just a truth that lived in the walls. You worked, you kept going. You did not ask the world to slow down for you. When Nadia was 16, her mother got sick. Not dramatically, not all at once. Slowly, the way a tide goes out. First it was fatigue. Then it was the joints. Then it was a diagnosis that the doctor delivered in careful, measured language that meant, this is going to be expensive, and long and hard. Nadia was 22 when she enlisted. She told herself it was for the education benefit. She told herself it was practical, and it was. But it was also because she was someone who needed to put her body somewhere that matched how she felt inside. Contained, purposeful, required to be strong. She served 2 tours, one in Latvia with a NATO training mission, one in a place she still doesn't talk about in detail, except to say it was dry and it was loud, and she came back with her hearing slightly off in her left ear and a way of scanning rooms that never really went away. She came home at 27. She went to Ryerson, now Toronto Metropolitan, on a Veterans Transition Grant. She studied community social work. She graduated. She got a job with a nonprofit in the West End that ran after-school programs for kids in low-income housing. She was good at it, better than good. She had this quality, calm but not distant, like the quiet you feel in a building that's been built properly. Solid. And then, on a Tuesday in November, 3 years into that job, she got a call. Her mother had fallen. Not a metaphor, literally fallen, in the bathroom of the apartment they still shared on Markham Street, the apartment they'd moved into when Nadia came home from service. A stroke. Minor, the paramedic said. But there is no minor when it's your mother. Her mother came home from the hospital 10 days later with a cane and a folder of instructions and a referral to a physiotherapy clinic that had a 6-week wait list. Nadia requested a temporary leave from the nonprofit. They gave it to her. That was supposed to be 6 weeks. It turned into 4 months. It turned into Nadia sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, going over numbers that didn't add up because her EI hadn't come through, and her mother's disability payment was delayed, and the heating bill was the kind of number that made your chest go tight. It turned into her daughter, Ama, who was 11 and in grade 6 at the school on Dundas, watching all of this without being told to, understanding more than a child should have to understand. Ama Mensah-Forson was not a quiet child. Exactly. She was precise. She thought before she spoke. She had her mother's steadiness and something extra, an attention to people that made adults stop and look at her twice. She noticed things. A man outside the corner store who had been there 3 days in a row, too still, too cold. A woman on the streetcar who kept opening and closing her wallet without buying anything. Her teacher, Miss Chadwick, who smiled wide in the mornings and small in the afternoons. On the morning of November 14th, Ama was on her way to school. She had left early because her mother had asked her to drop a form off at the Community Health Center on the way, which was 2 blocks out of her route, and Ama had said okay and put the form in the front pocket of her backpack and left at 7:15. She was walking past the Fairmont Royal York when she saw the woman. The woman was sitting on the low stone wall outside the hotel, not a bench, the decorative stone ledge that runs along the front of the building. She was wearing a good coat, camel-colored wool, the kind with real buttons, the kind that costs more than Ama's mother spent on groceries in a month. But she was sitting crooked, leaning slightly to one side, and her hands were in her lap doing nothing, and she was looking at the street with an expression that Ama recognized. It was the expression of someone who had lost the thread. Not confused exactly. More like a word you know perfectly well that has suddenly become unfamiliar. You stare at it, and it won't come back. Ama stopped. She stood there on the sidewalk for a moment. The morning rush was going around her on both sides. Nobody else stopped. There were people in good shoes moving fast, people on phones, a courier on a bike who swung wide to avoid a taxi. Nobody stopped. Ama went over to the woman. "Are you okay?" she asked. The woman looked at her. Her eyes were pale blue and slightly clouded, and for a moment had nothing in them. Then something shifted like a lamp coming on in a far room. "I'm waiting," the woman said. "For who?" The woman opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands. "I know his name," she said. "I know it. It starts with..." She pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. "It starts with a day. Do you live here?" Ama asked. "At the hotel?" "No," the woman said. Then, uncertain, "I don't think so." Ama unzipped her backpack and took out her phone, a cracked screen hand-me-down that her mother had put on a prepaid plan. She looked at the woman's coat, at the leather bag on the woman's lap, which was expensive-looking but unclosed, wallet visible at the top. What's your name?" Ama asked. The woman looked up, and then, clearly, with relief, as if this one thing had stayed solid. "Francis. Francis Alcott Webb." Ama typed the name into her phone. She wasn't searching the internet. She was just writing it down in her notes app, the way her mother had taught her to remember important things. The door of the hotel opened and a man came out, tall, dark overcoat, silver hair, phone in hand. He had the walk of someone who expected the path to clear for him, and it usually did. That was Senator Douglas Whitmore. He was 3 steps from his Escalade when Ama moved in front of him. Not aggressively. She just stepped into his path and said, "Please." And he stopped, and she said, "That woman on the wall needs help. She doesn't know where she is. Her name is Francis Alcott Webb, and she needs someone to call someone for her." Whitmore looked at Ama. Then he looked at Francis. Something crossed his face. Not recognition, exactly. More like the memory of recognition. He walked over slowly and crouched in front of the woman on the wall. "Francis," he said. She looked at him, that far room lamp again brightening. "Oh," she said. "Oh, I know you." "You do," he said. "We've met at the Harborfront benefit. 3 years running. You always bid on the photography lot." She laughed, a small, startled sound. "I always win the photography lot." He smiled. He got on his phone and called someone. A family name, it turned out. Alcott Webb was a name attached to a real estate development company in North York, one of the old families. Frances was 79. She had a driver who was supposed to have picked her up 45 minutes ago and hadn't shown. and she had wandered out front to wait, and somewhere in the waiting the thread had slipped. Within 20 minutes, her son arrived. A man in his 50s named Roland, tight-jawed and pale, who looked at the scene, his mother sitting calmly with a senator and a child in a toque, with an expression that was hard to read. Ama was late for school by then. Whitmore offered to have Wallace drive her. She said, "It's okay, I can take the streetcar," he said. "Please, it's the least I can do." And so she got in the car. Here's where the story should have ended. Girl helps lost woman, senator helps girl, everyone goes home. But Roland Alcott Webb was not the kind of man who received situations gracefully. He was the kind of man who needed to control the shape of a story, especially a story that might get out, because his mother's condition was not publicly known, and her wandering from whatever location she'd started at that morning raised questions he didn't want asked. 3 days later, a lawyer contacted the nonprofit where Nadia worked. She'd gone back part-time by then, with a letter suggesting that Ama had targeted Frances intentionally, that she had approached a vulnerable elderly woman with the intent to access her wallet, the wallet, which Ama had not touched, which was still on Frances's lap, unclosed, exactly as it had been. The letter was full of careful language, words like concerning and proximity and reportedly removed items, that last one entirely fabricated. It was the kind of letter designed to do damage without making a specific claim, because specific claims can be disproven and careful language just sits there, spreading doubt. Nadia read it 3 times at the kitchen table. Then she put it down and looked at her daughter and said, "Tell me exactly what happened." And Ama told her. Not nervously, not defensively, with the same precision she brought to everything, the order of events, what she had touched, what she had said, what the woman had said. She still had the note in her phone. Frances Alcott Webb, typed at 7:22 in the morning, time-stamped. "Okay," Nadia said. "Just okay." But the way she said it, Ama knew. Her mother was already working. What the Alcott Webb family and their lawyer, a man named Preston Hale of Hale, Drummond and Voss, did not know was what Ama Mensah-Forson had done for 2 years in service before she was transferred to logistics. She had been a military police investigator. She had interviewed people under pressure. She knew how legal language worked, how intimidation worked, what a letter like this was actually designed to accomplish. She also knew that the senator had been there. She called the senator's constituency office. She did not expect much. She had spent enough time in institutional spaces to know that powerful people often don't remember small moments, or choose not to. She left a message with a brief, factual description of what had happened and her contact information. Senator Whitmore called her back himself. That afternoon, he had already spoken to his own team, he told her, because Roland Alcott Webb had contacted him too, a softer, political version of the same pressure. A request that Whitmore stay out of it and let the family handle things quietly. Whitmore had said he'd think about it, but then he'd thought about it. "My office will provide a written account of everything I witnessed," he told Nadia. "And I want you to know that my account is going to be very clear about what that girl did and didn't do." The campaign to discredit Ama did not survive contact with the facts. It unraveled the way these things unravel when they meet actual documentation. The senator's signed statement, the phone timestamp, the hotel's exterior security footage, which the manager, a practical woman named Odile, who had watched the whole thing from the lobby and had her own feelings about it, had already pulled and retained. Preston Hale withdrew the letter, not with an apology that would have been too much to hope for, but with a formal retraction, the kind that is legally necessary and personally costless. But Roland Alcott Webb made one mistake. He made it publicly. At a charity dinner in early December, he told a version of the story to a table of 8 that included a journalist from the Globe and Mail who was there as a guest, not as a journalist, but who recognized a story when she heard one. The version Roland told involved an opportunistic child from a bad neighborhood and a senator being taken in by appearances. The journalist, whose name was Brigid Okafor, went home and made some calls. The story she published 2 weeks later was not about Roland's version of events. It was about Ama. It was about a girl who stopped on a busy downtown sidewalk at 7 in the morning when nobody else did, who typed a stranger's name into her phone, who stepped in front of a senator's car and said one word, not for herself, not for any reward, but because someone needed help and she was there. The piece ran on the front page of the Saturday edition, above the fold. Brigid had found 3 other people who'd been on that sidewalk that morning and walked past. She interviewed them. She asked them why they hadn't stopped. Their answers were honest and varied and a little uncomfortable to read. Then she quoted Ama. Brigid had called Nadia to request an interview, and Nadia had said she'd ask Ama, and Ama had said yes, but she wanted to answer the questions herself, no coaching. So Brigid had sat at their kitchen table on Markham Street, the same table where Nadia did her budgets at midnight, where Ama did her homework, where the form for the community health center had been packed into the front pocket of a backpack, and asked Ama why she stopped. Ama thought about it for a moment. She had that look, Ama said, like when you know something, and then you don't know it anymore, and you're scared, but you're trying not to be scared because you're in public. Have you seen that look before? Brigid asked. On my grandma, Ama said, before she got really sick. She used to get it sometimes, and then she'd find the word she was looking for, and it would go away. That lady on the wall, she was looking for something, and it wasn't coming back. So I stopped. Brigid wrote that down exactly as Ama said it. It was the line that people remembered. The comment sections were full of people quoting it. That look. Like when you know something and then you don't know it anymore. Senator Whitmore read the piece on Saturday morning at his house in Rosedale. He read it twice. Then he called his chief of staff and asked her to find out if there was anything he could do for the family. Not performatively, not for the cameras, just actually. It turned out there were things. The nonprofit Nadia worked for had lost a provincial funding stream in the last budget cycle. Whitmore was not on that committee, but he knew someone who was. A quiet word, a well-placed question, a reminder that community after-school programs in the West End served a population that tended to have strong opinions at election time. The funding was reinstated in the spring estimates. Nadia didn't find out where that came from for 6 months. When she did, she called the senator's office and asked to speak with him directly. His assistant said he was in committee. She left a message. He called back 3 hours later. I heard you got the funding, he said. I'm calling to say thank you, she said, and to ask you not to do anything else without asking me first. There was a pause. Fair enough, he said. I mean it. We don't need to be someone's project. You're not, he said. But I'm going to be honest with you. I feel better about what happened to your daughter than I have any right to. A letter like that, from people like that, aimed at a kid like her, that could have gone differently. That kind of thing usually does go differently. I know, Nadia said. So I wanted to do something useful. The funding is useful, she said. Ama doesn't need a ceremony. He laughed. She told Brigid Okafor she didn't want to be on TV. She said if they wanted to put someone on TV, they should put the 3 people who walked past. He laughed again, longer this time. She's right. She usually is. Roland Alcott Webb issued a statement through Hale, Drummond and Voss that expressed regret for any confusion arising from the initial correspondence. The statement did not use the word apology. The family donated $50,000 to an Alzheimer's Research Foundation, announced separately, in a different week, in a way that was careful not to be connected. Preston Hale's name appeared in the Law Society of Ontario's Professional Conduct Bulletin 4 months later, in relation to a different matter, with different clients, but the same general approach. Intimidation dressed as paperwork. The bulletin was public record. Brigid Okafor wrote a follow-up. It was shorter and ran on a Tuesday, but people read it. Francis Alcott Webb's driver, the one who hadn't shown that morning, was let go. The family hired a private care coordinator. Francis moved later that winter to a residence in North York with a memory care wing, a garden, and a photography club that met on Thursdays. She sent a card to the address on Markham Street. Nadia wasn't sure how she got it. The card had a picture of a bird on the front. Inside, in handwriting that shook a little at the edges, it said, "To the girl who stopped. Thank you for finding the word for me." Ama put it on the wall above her desk. Not framed. Just taped up, slightly crooked, next to a permission slip she'd forgotten to hand in, and a postcard from her aunt in Accra. There was a morning in late January when Nadia was making tea before the sun came up, and Ama came into the kitchen in her socks and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it, and Nadia looked at her daughter in the gray pre-dawn light of their kitchen and thought, this is who she is. Not what she did on one morning on King Street West. This every day, at the counter, in her socks, paying attention to things. She didn't say any of that out loud. She handed Ama a piece of toast. Ama took it. Outside, the city was already starting. Buses pulling away from curbs, lights coming on in office windows, the first streetcar of the morning making its particular sound on the rails. All those people going somewhere. Most of them moving fast, most of them looking straight ahead. And somewhere on a street in this city, right now, someone is sitting on a wall, waiting for a word they can't find. Most people will walk past. Ama stopped.